A royal guard woke up chained to a tree, his uniform torn, his medals missing, and no memory of how he got there. It wasn't a prank, it wasn't random, and what happened next would shake the entire regiment to its core. So how did it all begin? Before we answer that, press the subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us where in the world you're watching from. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. The autumn chill settled over London as Guard Isaiah Clarke finally stepped away from his post outside Buckingham Palace. His shoulders ached from maintaining perfect posture for nearly 6 hours, the weight of the ceremonial bearskin cap having left a dull pressure ring around his forehead. As he made his way through St. James's Park, the evening fog rolled in, casting ghostly halos around the lampposts that illuminated his path. Isaiah took a deep breath, savouring the simple pleasure of movement after the rigid stillness of duty. He rolled his neck slightly, feeling the tension release in small, satisfying pops. The ceremonial scarlet tunic with its distinctive brass buttons caught the amber glow of the lamps, occasionally drawing glances from evening strollers who recognised the famous uniform even without the full regalia. "Just get home, shower and sleep," he muttered to himself, mentally calculating the hours before his next shift. The life of a Queen's Guard wasn't merely the ceremonial statue-like stance tourists photographed. It was a demanding rotation of duties that required near superhuman endurance. He patted the left breast of his tunic, feeling the reassuring outline of his medals beneath the fabric. The gesture had become almost subconscious, a habit formed over 3 years of service. The most precious among them wasn't even his, the medal Fraser had earned, given to Isaiah by Fraser's mother after the funeral. "He'd want you to carry it," she had said, pressing it into his palm with trembling fingers. As Isaiah cut through the park's winding paths, the crowds thinned. Only a few joggers and dog walkers remained, hurrying to finish their routines before darkness fully descended. The familiar route would save him 15 minutes compared to the main roads, 15 minutes closer to home to rest. A twig snapped somewhere behind him. Isaiah's military instincts flared to life. Without breaking stride or obviously changing his demeanour, he catalogued his surroundings, mentally marking possible cover positions and escape routes. The footsteps he'd dismissed as another pedestrian had maintained a consistent distance for too long to be coincidental. He made a casual turn onto a less travelled path, a deviation from his usual route. The footsteps followed. Isaiah quickened his pace slightly, his hand instinctively reaching for a sidearm that wasn't there. Ceremonial guards didn't carry weapons off duty. "Stay calm. Assess the situation," he reminded himself, the mantra from his training surfacing automatically. He considered turning to confront his follower directly when a sudden movement in his peripheral vision registered a second presence. Too late, Isaiah realized he had been herded. The first blow came from behind, professional, targeted at the base of his neck. Isaiah's training kicked in as he twisted away, absorbing some of the impact and turning to face his attacker. He caught a glimpse of a dark-clothed figure, face obscured by a balaclava. The man's stance betrayed military training, his movements too precise for a common mugger. "What do you want?" Isaiah demanded, shifting into a defensive posture. The attacker didn't respond, instead circling slowly. The second figure emerged from the shadows, similarly dressed. 2-on-1 coordinated attack. This was planned. Isaiah lashed out with a precise strike, connecting with the first attacker's shoulder. The man barely flinched, confirming Isaiah's suspicion. These weren't opportunistic criminals. He didn't see the needle until it was too late. The second attacker had used the distraction to close distance, plunging the syringe into Isaiah's upper arm with practiced efficiency. The effect was almost immediate, his vision blurred, limbs growing impossibly heavy. "Why?" was all Isaiah managed before his knees buckled beneath him. The last thing he registered was being caught before hitting the ground. The careful way they handled him, suggesting this wasn't a random attack of opportunity, but something altogether more deliberate. Then darkness swept in, and Isaiah Clarke knew nothing more. Cold. That was Isaiah's first conscious thought as awareness gradually returned to him. Cold and damp. His eyelids felt weighted, requiring tremendous effort to open. When he finally managed it, the world was a blurry haze of greens and browns, slowly resolving into the canopy of trees above him. Dawn light filtered through the leaves, suggesting several hours had passed since his encounter in the park. Instinctively, he tried to sit up, only to be yanked back by an unyielding resistance at his wrists and ankles. The metallic clank of chains confirmed what his foggy mind was struggling to process. He was restrained. Fully alert now, Isaiah assessed his situation with military precision, despite the lingering effects of whatever drug they'd used on him. He was secured to a massive oak tree with industrial-grade chains, the type used in construction, not the flimsy locks used by protesters. His arms were pulled around the trunk behind him, shoulders strained to their limit, while his ankles were bound together with a separate length of chain. Whoever had done this knew what they were doing. The bindings were tight enough to prevent escape, but carefully positioned to avoid cutting off circulation. They hadn't wanted him dead, at least not from exposure or restricted blood flow. The surrounding woods were unfamiliar. Definitely not any part of London's parks he recognised. Judging by the density of the trees and the absence of city sounds, he'd been transported some distance from the capital. Perhaps one of the larger forests within an hour's drive, Epping maybe, or parts of the North Downs. "Focus, Clark," he muttered, his voice rough from dryness. "Assess situation, identify resources, determine course of action." It was then that Isaiah noticed the state of his uniform. His heart sank as he looked down at himself. The scarlet tunic that he maintained with meticulous care was now torn and muddied beyond recognition. One sleeve was partially ripped from the shoulder seam, brass buttons were missing, and the fabric was deliberately slashed in several places, not the random damage of struggle, but deliberate desecration. Worse still, as his gaze travelled to his chest, the crushing realization hit him. His medals, including the military cross he'd earned during the Balkan peacekeeping operation, and most devastatingly Fraser's medal, were gone. Someone had carefully cut them from his tunic, leaving only ragged threads and empty spaces where symbols of honour had once rested. Isaiah's gaze shot to his head, confirming another loss. His bearskin cap, the distinctive symbol of the Queen's Guard that required immaculate maintenance, was nowhere to be seen. A quick scan of the immediate area showed no sign of it. They had taken it, or more likely given the state of his uniform destroyed it. The violation felt unexpectedly intimate. These weren't just possessions. They were extensions of his identity, physical representations of sacrifice and duty. For a royal guard, the uniform wasn't merely clothing. It was the embodiment of centuries of tradition, discipline and honour. His right hand flexed involuntarily, muscle memory reaching for medals that were no longer there. The small gesture sent a jarring pain through his shoulder, but Isaiah barely registered it. Where his fingers expected to find the reassuring texture of metal, there was nothing but torn fabric and empty space. Isaiah's jaw clenched, the muscles in his neck standing out as he fought to maintain control. The chain around his wrists rattled slightly as his hands formed tight fists behind the tree trunk. For a single, unguarded moment, something dangerous flashed across his usually composed features. Raw fury, quickly suppressed, but undeniably present. He took a deep breath, then another, using the breathing techniques drilled into him during training. 4 seconds in, hold for 7, out for 8. The controlled rhythm brought his pulse back down, clearing his mind of the emotional fog that threatened to cloud his judgment. Focus on the objective, he reminded himself. Honour isn't in the decorations. But as his fingers traced the empty space where Fraser's medal had been, the tactical part of Isaiah's mind temporarily gave way to memory. The precision of his breathing faltered, and for the first time since waking in chains, Isaiah Clarke's impeccable control slipped. His mind carried him back 3 years, to a day marked by both triumph and devastating loss. To a mission that had earned him his own medal, but cost him his closest friend. To Fraser Mowden's final act of selfless courage, and the promise Isaiah had made to honour it every day he wore the uniform. The Balkans, 3 years earlier. Isaiah could still smell the distinct mixture of cordite, dust and fear that had permeated the air that day. United Nations peacekeeping mission, supposedly non-combat, though someone had evidently failed to inform the local militia groups of that distinction. Their 8-man team had been escorting humanitarian supplies through a contested mountain pass when the ambush hit. Fraser Mowden had been at the point position, his lean frame deceptively strong, his observation skills unmatched in their unit. They'd served together for 18 months by then, forging the unique bond that comes only from placing your life repeatedly in another's hands. Fraser was the quiet counterpoint to Isaiah's more methodical nature. Intuitive, where Isaiah was analytical. Quick-witted, where Isaiah was deliberate. "I don't like it," Fraser had muttered that morning, eyes scanning the ridgelines. "Too quiet. Birds aren't singing." Isaiah remembered dismissing the concern, not out of arrogance, but because the intelligence reports had marked this section as secure. "Ornithology wasn't listed in your service record, Mowden," he'd joked, the last light moment before their world exploded. The first RPG had struck their lead vehicle without warning, sending it cartwheeling off the narrow mountain road. What followed was 46 minutes of chaotic close-quarters combat against an enemy with superior numbers and higher ground. "Clark, 9 o'clock ridge!" Fraser's warning had saved Isaiah from the sniper's bullet, giving him the split second needed to dive behind a boulder as rounds chipped stone where he'd stood. They'd fought their way to a defensive position, calling for evacuation while returning fire to protect the aid workers caught in the crossfire. It was the kind of situation where training overrides thought, where actions become automatic and time seems to simultaneously accelerate and slow down. Then came the moment that had changed everything. The distinctive metallic clink of a grenade landing in their position. Isaiah had been helping a wounded aid worker, his back momentarily turned. He didn't see the grenade, only heard Fraser's voice, unnaturally calm in the chaos. "I've got this one, mate." 3 simple words that contained multitudes, not a dramatic goodbye or noble declaration, just the matter-of-fact statement of a soldier making a split-second decision. Isaiah turned just in time to see Fraser lunge forward, covering the grenade with his body, using the reinforced plate in his body armour to direct the blast downward. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Fraser's showing not fear but absolute clarity of purpose. The explosion had been strangely muted, absorbed by Fraser's sacrifice. Where there should have been a deafening roar that killed everyone in the gully, there was instead a dull thump, and Fraser's body lifting slightly before settling back to the earth. In the ringing silence that followed, Isaiah remembered thinking irrationally that Fraser would sit up, make some characteristic dry joke about the situation, but the stillness of his friend's body conveyed the truth before Isaiah's mind could process it. Fraser Mowden was gone, his final act saving Isaiah and 3 civilians huddled in their makeshift shelter. 6 weeks later, in London, Isaiah had stood at attention as Fraser's family received the posthumous George Cross. Isaiah's own military cross ceremony had been the following day, though the medal had felt like lead against his chest, heavy with the knowledge that he stood there only because Fraser no longer could. After the formal proceedings, Fraser's mother had approached him. Marion Mowden was a small woman, with her son's same steady gaze, grief etched into the lines around her eyes, but her bearing remarkably composed. "Fraser spoke of you in his letters," she'd said, her Scottish accent more pronounced with emotion, "said you were the most reliable man he'd ever served with." Isaiah had struggled to find appropriate words, settling on the inadequate truth. "He saved all our lives. I wouldn't be standing here if not for him." She'd nodded, as if confirming something to herself, then reached into her handbag. This was his first medal, Distinguished Service in Sierra Leone, before you knew him. She'd pressed the medal into Isaiah's palm, closing his fingers around it when he tried to protest. "I have his others. This one, I think he'd want you to carry it, to remember." From that day forward, Isaiah had worn Fraser's medal alongside his own, positioned precisely according to regulations, but carrying a weight no protocol could measure. Each morning as he donned his uniform, he'd touch the medal briefly, not out of superstition, but as a renewal of purpose, a silent acknowledgement of the debt he carried. Now, chained to a tree with that physical connection stolen, Isaiah felt Fraser's absence with renewed sharpness. One tear, all he would permit himself, had already fallen. In its wake came not despair, but a hardening resolve. Whoever had taken Fraser's medal had unknowingly taken something irreplaceable, something sacred. "I'll find it, Fraser," Isaiah whispered to the morning air, "whatever it takes." With that promise spoken aloud, Isaiah Clarke set aside memory and returned fully to the present moment. There would be time for reflection later. Now, he needed to focus on the immediate challenge: escape. Isaiah assessed his restraints with methodical precision, the tactical part of his mind fully engaged again. The chains were industrial grade, wrapped multiple times around his wrists and ankles, then secured around the tree trunk. Professional work, not the hasty bindings of amateurs. His captors had known what they were doing. The links were too thick to break by force, and there was no visible lock he could manipulate. Isaiah tested the tension from various angles, seeking any slack in the system. There was precious little. The positioning had been calculated to prevent leverage, keeping his arms extended just enough to limit strength, but not enough to cause circulation damage. The bark of the oak tree pressed roughly against his back, its ancient trunk unyielding. Isaiah shifted position slightly, feeling something catch against his uniform. Twisting his head as far as possible, he glimpsed what his fingers had already identified: a protruding section of bark with a jagged, almost blade-like edge, where lightning had once split the outer layer. "That's something," he muttered, immediately beginning to maneuver the chain links against the natural edge. The process was excruciatingly slow. Each movement required precise control to maintain contact between metal and the improvised cutting edge. The angle was awkward, straining muscles already taxed by his bindings. Within minutes, sweat beaded on Isaiah's forehead despite the morning chill. An hour passed with minimal progress, the thick chain resisting his efforts. Isaiah paused, breathing deliberately to manage the growing pain in his shoulders. The guard's famous discipline, the ability to stand motionless for hours, now served him in an unexpected way, allowing him to endure discomfort that would have broken many others. Different approach, he decided, examining the chains more carefully. The technique was one he'd learned during specialized escape training, a last resort method rarely taught outside elite military units. It required deliberately dislocating the thumb to reduce hand width, potentially allowing extraction from otherwise inescapable restraints. The procedure was painful and carried risk of permanent damage, but under the circumstances, Isaiah saw no alternatives. He positioned his right hand carefully, mentally preparing for what would come next. The method required precise application of pressure and leverage, not brute force, which would only cause injury without achieving freedom. 3, 2, 1, Isaiah counted down quietly, then executed the maneuver with controlled force. The distinctive pop, as his thumb joint separated, sent a wave of nausea-inducing pain up his arm. Isaiah's breath hissed between clenched teeth, his vision momentarily swimming with black spots. He didn't cry out, Royal Guard training having instilled the ability to endure pain in silence, but for several seconds he could only focus on breathing through the agony. When the initial shock subsided, Isaiah began the delicate process of extracting his now narrower hand from the chain. The metal scraped painfully against his skin as he worked it past his knuckles millimetre by millimetre. Blood slicked his wrist where the rough edges cut into flesh, actually helping lubricate the extraction. After what seemed an eternity, his right hand pulled free with a final, painful twist. The sudden release sent another jolt of agony through his dislocated thumb, but Isaiah barely registered it. One hand free meant everything had changed. Working quickly, despite the throbbing pain, he used his freed hand to manipulate the chains binding his left wrist. Without needing to dislocate the second thumb, he created enough slack to slip his left hand through as well, though the process left his wrists raw and bleeding. The ankle chains presented less challenge once he could use both hands. Within minutes, Isaiah was completely free, though far from unscathed. He knelt on the forest floor, allowing himself 10 seconds, no more, to recover before resetting his dislocated thumb. Standard field procedure, he reminded himself, positioning the joint correctly. With a sharp, decisive movement, he forced the thumb back into its socket. The pain peaked in a white-hot flash, before gradually subsiding to a more manageable throb. Isaiah flexed his hand cautiously, confirming basic functionality despite the injury. His uniform was beyond salvation, but he gathered the remaining fragments with careful hands, especially the torn section where his medals had been mounted. Though the decorations themselves were gone, the torn fabric held significance he couldn't abandon. His professional assessment suggested this had been a targeted attack rather than a random crime of opportunity. The level of planning, the specific focus on his uniform and medals, the careful isolation, all pointed to someone with both resources and a specific grudge against what the Royal Guards represented. Isaiah considered his options. The rational move would be to find the nearest road and seek help. But something deeper, more primal, held him in place. Whoever had done this might return to check their handiwork. If Isaiah wanted answers, wanted to recover what had been taken from him, his best chance might be to wait and observe. The natural hollow beneath a fallen oak provided optimal concealment. Isaiah settled into position with the patience born from countless hours of ceremonial stillness. His observation post offered clear sightlines to the tree where he'd been restrained, while keeping him hidden from casual detection. By the third hour, Isaiah began reassessing his strategy. The consistent absence of human activity suggested his captors might not return. "They're not coming back," he finally concluded, voicing the assessment aloud to break the silence. The decision to relocate wasn't made lightly. Remaining would maximize his chances of confronting those responsible, but the temperature was dropping as evening approached. His injuries needed proper treatment, and his precise location remained unknown. Weighing operational factors against emotional drive, Isaiah made the decision any professional soldier would: mission flexibility over rigid adherence to initial objective. After locating a small stream, Isaiah followed it for nearly 2 hours. As dusk approached, the distinctive sound of vehicle traffic penetrated the forest ambience. A road, perhaps a kilometre away? Just as he approached the forest boundary, a voice called out, "Who's there?" "I need assistance," Isaiah replied, his voice hoarse from hours without water. An elderly man in Wellington boots emerged, his eyes widening as he registered Isaiah's appearance. "Good Lord," the man exclaimed. "What's happened to you, son?" "I was attacked," Isaiah replied simply, maintaining dignity despite his appearance. "I need to contact authorities." The elderly man, Roger Kensington, didn't waste time with unnecessary questions. He offered to drive Isaiah directly to the police station. As they walked toward Roger's vehicle, the elderly man removed his jacket and offered it to Isaiah with quiet understanding. "My father was military. I understand what that uniform means to you, even in its current state." "Whoever did this," Roger said quietly as they reached his car, "they clearly don't understand what they were really attacking. They thought they were attacking the uniform, but they should have realized it's the man who gives the uniform its meaning, not the other way around." The fluorescent lights of Uxbridge Police Station cast harsh shadows across Isaiah's face as he sat opposite Detective Inspector Catherine Wendell, nearly 12 hours since his abduction. The borrowed jacket from Roger Kensington covered the worst of his uniform's destruction, while medical staff had treated his injuries. Lieutenant Colonel James Blackwood, commanding officer of Isaiah's unit, arrived shortly after. "Guard Clark," Blackwood acknowledged, his gaze quickly assessing Isaiah's condition. "At ease, Clark. I've read the preliminary report. Your actions were exemplary under the circumstances." Isaiah recounted his experience with precision, his narrative devoid of emotional embellishment, but excluding no potentially useful detail. The technical description of his escape particularly impressed Blackwood, though the commander's expression darkened upon hearing about the stolen medals. "The military cross is replaceable," Blackwood noted, "but I understand Guardsman Moden's medal holds special significance." Isaiah's composure wavered slightly, the only indication being a momentary tightening around his eyes. "Yes, sir." "We'll prioritize recovery of those items," D.I. Wendell assured them both. "Given the apparent planning involved, we're treating this as a targeted attack with potential broader implications for palace security." As the interview concluded, Blackwood remained behind for a private word with Isaiah. When they were alone, the lieutenant colonel's formal demeanour softened slightly. "James Fraser Moden was under my command before your joint deployment," Blackwood revealed, surprising Isaiah. "Exemplary soldier. His loss was felt throughout the regiment." Isaiah nodded, momentarily unable to speak past the unexpected tightness in his throat. "I understand the significance of that medal," Blackwood continued. "In the meantime—" He reached into his pocket, removing something small. "This isn't a replacement. Nothing could be, but perhaps it will serve until the original is recovered." He placed a regimental pin on the table, a small emblem worn by senior officers, typically not issued to guardsmen regardless of merit. Isaiah recognized it immediately as Blackwood's personal insignia from his own combat deployment. "Sir, I couldn't possibly "It's temporary, Clark," Blackwood interrupted, his tone returning to military briskness. "I expect it returned when you're reunited with Moden's medal." Isaiah understood the gesture for what it was, not merely symbolic, but a commander's vote of confidence. "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." 3 days later, Isaiah Clarke resumed his post outside Buckingham Palace. To tourists capturing photographs of the iconic scarlet uniformed figure, he appeared identical to any other royal guard, the perfect embodiment of disciplined tradition. They couldn't see the regimental pin carefully positioned where Fraser's medal had once rested, a temporary placeholder for something irreplaceable. His eyes, fixed in the ceremonial 1,000-yard stare, revealed nothing of the ongoing investigation or his private determination to recover what had been taken from him. The case remained unsolved, the perpetrators unidentified, their motives unclear. But beneath the immaculate exterior of military discipline, Isaiah Clarke's resolve burned steady and unwavering. A promise kept to a fallen comrade, a duty that transcended the uniform itself. Have you ever had something taken from you that held deep personal meaning beyond its material value? How did you respond to that loss? Did it break your spirit or strengthen your resolve? What do you think carries more weight? The physical symbols of honour like medals and uniforms, or the inner values and commitments they represent? If this story of dignity under attack resonated with you, hit that subscribe button and notification bell to join our community that appreciates stories of honour, duty and resilience in the face of adversity. Share this with someone who understands that true strength comes not from external symbols, but from the character within. Our other Royal Guard stories are appearing on your screen now. Check them out to discover more powerful narratives about the men behind the iconic uniform. We'll see you tomorrow at the same time with another brand new story. Until then, remember that what we stand for always matters more than what we wear.